darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken. No, I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. I am not captive to the lies. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. Oh, I won't be shaken. No, I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, I'm standing. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. Power in your name. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, yeah, when I'm standing in your love. Oh, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, I'm standing in your love. Oh, standing on the rock. Oh, I'm standing in your love.
Hello and welcome to Long Hill Chapel Online. My name is Andy.
And I'm Daria, and we would love for you to connect with us more. You can do so by heading over to our website, www.lhcnj.net, where you will find everything that you need to know about Long Hill Chapel.
That's right. And now, maybe you've been watching with us for a while, and you're thinking, how can I take another step in their direction? Well, we want to invite you to a Zoom meeting on March 11th at 7 p.m., and that's a membership pathway. That's just called Pathway because we're not boring like a meeting, and it's not a class like we're teaching the whole time. It's interactive. But if you want that Zoom link, find out more about what we're about, then you just simply fill out our Connect card. It's right there on our website, or you can visit it directly at www.lhcnj/connect.
We hope to see you there.
In the darkness we were waiting. to reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. In the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who'd come to the Father are restored. And the Church of Christ was born. Then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not fade. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free, for the love of Jesus Christ who has resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings. We've seen what you can do, oh God of wonders. Your power has no end. The things you've done before, in greater measure, you will do again. 'Cause there's no prison wall you can break through, no mountain you can move. All things are possible. There's no broken body you can raise, no soul that you can save. All things are possible. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God, a revival. Let hope arise. Death is overcome. You've already won. Oh God, a revival. You rose So why should my heart fear what you've defeated? I will trust in you alone, 'cause there's no prison wall you can break through, no mountain you can move. All things are possible. There's no broken body you can raise, no soul that you can save. All things are possible. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God, a revival. Let hope arise. Death is overcome. You've already won. Oh God, a revival. Oh God, a revival. Come awaken your people. Come awaken the city. Oh God of revival, pour it out, pour it out. Every stronghold will crumble. I hear the chains hit the ground. Oh God of revival, pour it out, pour it out. Come awaken your people. Come awaken the city. Oh God of revival, pour it out, pour it out. Every stronghold will crumble. I hear the chains hit the ground. Oh God of revival, pour it out, pour it out. God of revival. God of revival. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God of revival. Let hope arise. Death is overcome. You've already won. Oh God of revival. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God of revival. Let hope arise. Death is overcome, and you've already won. Oh God of revival. And praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings.
Good morning, LHC Kids and Beyond. I'm Miss Daria, and I'm so excited you're joining me today. We are going to continue our conversations regarding the book of Nehemiah from the Bible, and today we're going to hear from Joey, who is going to talk to us more about chapter 7. Before he gets started, I want to talk to you about being in community. It is so easy, especially right now, for us to isolate, want to be by ourselves, and not be part of the community. I totally understand we are in different circumstances right now, and for some of us, we do need to stay home and be a little bit more isolated than others, and that's okay. But what I want you to think about, even after this season of what we're going through ends, I want you to realize that it is very important for you to be part of the community. Whether it's working on projects, whether it's being on teams and in part of groups at your school, we do so much better when we do it together. And I'm going to say that again. We do so much better when we do it together. So I love the people that I work with. I have the best friends and teams that I work with, whether it's with LHC kids, whether it's with my team that I work in the office and the pastoral staff. I am so blessed, and I love the team that God has put together for me. And I do say it's for me because I feel like sometimes there's events that I planned, like, Vacation Bible School or Sunday mornings when we have class, whether it's here on video or it's in the church on Sunday mornings, or our Easter egg hunt, all these different events and things that we do. I don't do them by myself. There are a team of people behind me, team of people beside me, team of people running with me that are doing this with me together. Miss Daria knows nothing about technology. I could not be putting these videos up in the middle of these services the way they are, but we have a team of people who have passion and who have gifting that do know how to do it. So it doesn't matter how much I'm able to do by myself. I know I could get things done, but it is so much more fun. It comes out so much better when we work together. VBS is what it is. If you've attended Vacation Bible School, you know how much fun we have. It's because there's teams and teams of people working on it. The Easter egg hunt, we're going to have that this year. You're going to see it's not just Miss Dairy. There's teams of people that come together to make it happen. And I want you to realize that when you are living life and doing every day, whether it's teaming up with your siblings, teaming up with your parents, your extended family, we do so much better when we do it together. And I want you to remember that. You might not be able to think of a way right now that you could be running the race or doing a project with someone right now. But there will come a time, and I want you to remember, yes, it will be easier if you do it by yourself. But being in community, you get to have more fun and do it together. And that is so worth going after. And it's so much more fun. So I want you to remember that. It is so much better when we do it together, living in community, having fun, and working on projects as teams. Remember that. I hope you have a great week, and I cannot wait to see you next week. Bye, kids. Have a great day.
Good morning, Long Hill Chapel. My name is Joey Monteleone, and I am the worship coordinator here on staff. And I'm very honored and privileged to be able to share with you this morning as we continue our book study in the book of Nehemiah. We're getting to know each other here. I'm getting better with names and faces, but if you get to know me for more than 5 minutes, you're going to learn that I'm a big fan of film. Film was a big part of my upbringing, and I love the medium of storytelling that movies allow. They can create a powerful aid in telling stories, sharing narratives, values, and all of it put together with the plot, the costumes, the visual effects is so powerful. And one of the most impactful movies that play into my love of film is a little movie called The Wizard of Oz. It's a small film, low budget, maybe you've heard of it. The Wizard of Oz is a 1939 American musical classic based on Frank L. Baum's 1900s children's novel. And the premise is that a young girl named Dorothy dreams of a life grander and more amazing than the one she currently has. And through a series of events, Dorothy ends up in Oz, a land with color and flying monkeys and munchkins and lions and tigers and bears, oh my. But throughout all the visual spectacle, the amazing songs, and developing an unhealthy fear of scarecrows, it's not till the very end of the movie that you realize that it was all a dream. Spoiler alert. So, the yellow brick road, the Emerald City, the ruby red slippers, none of it was the point. Sure, it occupied us for an hour and 52 minutes, but if you walked away from that film thinking that the point was to befriend a tin man and a scarecrow and a lion in the forest, you missed it. You see, it was never about all that. The point was that there's no place like home. And life is like that sometimes, pointing to the grand spectacle and the bright colors of our lives, but often the main point isn't what's right in front of us. Sometimes it's behind the curtain or beneath the surface. It just takes a shift, a subtle change in direction and attention so that our focus is where it needs to be. And while this applies in our storytelling, I think it's also crucial in our faith. You see, we too can become focused, thinking that God is doing one thing when He's actually doing something else. And if we don't have that shift in our perspective, we potentially could miss out on God's greatest work. And this is what we're going to dive into in our next chapter of Nehemiah. But before we do that, let's open in a word of prayer. Father, we come to your word with a blank slate, with an open mind, and with a willing heart to be changed. By the power of your Holy Spirit, would you enable us to be more like your Son, Jesus? Amen. Now, within The Wizard of Oz, you can recall a pretty big shift within the film. And that shift comes when the movie goes from sepia tone in Kansas to vibrant Technicolor in Oz. It's a visual cue that aids in the storytelling, but it also says that from here on out, everything will be different. The focus has changed, and the tone moving forward will be like this. And chapter 7 in Nehemiah is that same shift in the book. A lot of us come to a book like Nehemiah and we think, well, it's about a wall. You literally called the series Rebuilding. It's about a wall, it's about a wall, it's about a wall. Well, yeah, chapters 1 through 6 were about the wall, but now the book is going to change perspective and focus. And if you wanted to sum up that transition, if you wanted to understand what that shift is all about, it's this. The people were for the wall, but now the wall is for the people. The people were for the wall, but now the wall is for the people. The two are connected for sure, but the primary goal is no longer the construction of the fortress. It's more about what, and more specifically, who is inside of it. Let's read chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. After the wall had been rebuilt and I had set the doors in place, the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the Levites were appointed. I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother, Hanani, along with Hananiah, the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most people do. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. Also appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and some near their own houses. So with the focal point changing now, we're seeing Nehemiah do the work that the wall was for, which is establishing the city. But remember, what is the city right now? It's ruins. The wall prevents invasion, but inside was rubble, and they're supposed to live and worship there now? So, in a very real sense, the work, the true work, was just beginning. And not only was there desolation before Nehemiah physically, but as we saw last week in chapter 6, there was opposition against this rebuild. Probably more against Nehemiah than for him. But church, remember, when we're doing the work of God, it's never going to be easy. Never. Pastor Andy touched on that in week 2, that if there isn't opposition, you're probably doing it wrong because God's work is often countercultural. Nehemiah experienced criticism, gossip, complaining, temptation, threats, intimidation. And what's the common thread with all of this opposition? The thing that all of this has in common is that all of this is meant to produce fear. It's meant to cause you to question the calling of God. It's very similar to the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Did God really say that? Are you sure? It's meant to scare you into backing down. So, 2 things to remember when fear tactics are being used against us. The first is, as you face opposition, whether that's physical, emotional, or spiritual opposition, remember that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it until it's finally finished. That's Philippians 1:6. Like Pastor Michael mentioned in week 3, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. God is the one who calls you to the work, and he will be faithful not only to that call, but also to provide you everything you need to complete it. You see, God doesn't call those that he does not equip. That's why it says over 365 times in the Bible, fear not. You know, fear might work in our politics. It might work in our cancel culture. It might even work in religious mindsets. But church, fear doesn't work for God. Fear doesn't come from God. Love comes from God, and there is no fear in love because perfect love from God casts out fear. That's 1 John 4. So these nagging responses to God's work is literally designed to combat God himself. But it says in 2 Peter 1:3 that his divine power has given us everything we need for living a godly life, for combating fear, everything we need for doing God's work. So that's the first thing to remember when you face opposition. The second thing to remember about these fear-producing responses, threats, intimidation, complaining, gossip, criticism, these aren't things that just non-Christians struggle with. You deal with them too. I deal with them too. So as we do the work of God together here at LHC, let's do some personal inventory to not have this checklist on our leaders, on our staff, on our volunteers, but more importantly, to not have this checklist on each other. To quote a prophet from 2012, ain't nobody got time for that. Like we covered last week, we are doing a great work and we can't come down. We can't let things that produce fear slip into our churches and into our hearts because, again, that's not the main focus that we need to have. So those are 2 things to remember as we face fear, but how do we deal with fear? Let's not deny it and pretend it's not there. How do we deal with fear when it shows up? Well, you can actually see it within the passage. Verse 2 points out that Hananiah was a man of integrity, and he did what? He feared God more than most people do. There's something powerful in this observation here from Nehemiah, and it's how we combat fear in our lives. We replace the fear of everything else with the fear of God. We replace the fear of everything else with the fear of God. Now, we hear that phrase a lot in Christendom, the fear of the Lord, the fear of God. When we say the fear of God, I don't mean terror and fright. When we say fear, we mean to be in awe of something, a reverence, a respect, a recognition of God and who he is in the midst of our situation, an awareness of his might, his majesty, his beauty, and his wonder. And that awe and that awareness actually produces another thing, faith. It causes us to put our trust in him and Him alone. There are familiar passages within the Bible. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We see that in Proverbs 15:33. The Psalms have a few passages on it as well. But I think the section in the book of Job really hands this to us perfectly. It says in chapter 4, verse 6, "Is not your fear of God your confidence? Is not your fear of God your confidence?" An easy example of this is a campfire. Fire is nothing to play with. It's not a toy, and it's not something to be flippant with, but it has the power to warm and to provide and to protect. So I'm not afraid of a campfire, but I recognize its power, and its power brings me confidence. A pastor friend of mine, Matty Montgomery, wrote a book called Scary God, and in it he says this: "Your God is far scarier than your enemy, and He loves you relentlessly." We replace the fear of everything else with the fear of God. A fear that puts our situations in perspective. It reminds us of our position and God's love for us, but it also builds up our faith. And that healthy fear, that faith-building reverence for our God actually reminds us of the bigger picture. Well, what is the main point? What is the bigger picture? Well, let's keep reading. Nehemiah in these first 3 verses begins some serious delegation. His focus in the first 3 verses is about establishing leadership and security for the project that's just been completed. And this is perhaps something we could very easily skip over, that he set up leaders, but I think it's really important as we consider the last point we just made. It's important to remember that to handle the work that God has called you to, that never happens in a vacuum. When God created Adam, he said in Genesis 2:18, "It's not good for man to be alone." When God sends Moses to Pharaoh, he gives him Aaron. When he sends Moses to lead the people out of Egypt, he also provides Joshua. David has his Jonathan. Daniel has Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nehemiah has his leaders. Jesus has his disciples. Paul has his Timothy. We are literally not designed for solitude. So why do we think that the work of God is any different? There is an importance to spread out the work so that the burden doesn't just fall on you and you burn out. But I also think that there is a beauty in diversity of gifts, diversity of perspectives, diversity of thought, of mindsets that actually create a bigger and more beautiful mosaic. For example, I play music, obviously. Being your worship leader is a gift that I cherish. But before God placed me serving in the local church, I wanted to be the next singer-songwriter for Christian music. I would spend hours writing songs and recording records in my bedroom, and I can play different instruments and put them all together, and that music sounded interesting. But it wasn't until I did something called crowdfunding that my approach to music changed forever. Crowdfunding is where people pay money for you to book studio time and to pay other musicians who are far better than I will ever hope to be. And when that process happened, my music took on a new persona. It took on a new angle, a new embodiment of what was possible, because I was no longer the limit on the song's possibility. It wasn't just about me anymore. And that's why I love playing with a worship team. That's why I love being part of this staff. That's why I love the church. Because it's a constant reminder that we are different and we're called. And together we make something better. And that's what Nehemiah is doing here. He's recognizing the limits of his abilities and his effectiveness, and he's realizing and remembering that there is a grand vision and a main point. And we keep hinting at that main point. We keep talking about it. What is the grand vision? What is the shift in the book? What is it? Well, it's chapter 7, verse 6 to the end of the chapter. It's 67 verses of names. That's the shift. Pastors Michael and Andy do an amazing job with pronouncing names correctly. I am not blessed in that regard, so I'm not even going to try. But just take a minute and look at these names. These are fathers, heads of households. There are wives not specifically mentioned. There are children, little boys, and little girls, cousins, grandparents, aunts, uncles. The priests are mentioned, the Levites, the musicians, the gatekeepers, even the temple servants are listed. For me, when I start to see this list painstakingly detailed, this is the Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore moment, where everything from here on out is going to be different. You see, the focus is no longer on what we're building, it's who we've built it for. You see, Nehemiah isn't about a wall. It's about people and being able to connect those people to God. And why is chapter 7 so important? Well, it's because when you put a name and a face to something, it automatically increases its value. When you put a name and a face to something, it automatically increases its value. It increases its importance. It increases your responsibility. For example, it's very easy to say, children matter. It's more impactful to say, Nora, Callan, and Isla matter. Let's take it a step further. Nora Jules, Callan John, Isla Joy, Monteleone matter to me. You see the difference, right? The first is generic. It's easy to say, and there's not a lot of ownership to it. The second is specific. It's a little more complex and it's incredibly possessive because there's power in a name. And if we'll be super honest for a second, the church and Christianity have done a poor job over the years by taking away faces and names from people and replacing them with labels and stigmas. Here's how we do it. First, it's very generic. We call them sinners. The next level, they're non-believers. That's followed by segregation of race, political party, sexual orientation. And when we can no longer categorize them as other, then we might learn their name. Because it's really easy to brand people when you have no intention of loving them. It's really easy to brand people when you have no intention of loving them. But that's not what Jesus did. A very interesting study in the New Testament is to look at the lives of the people that Jesus called specifically by name. Their lives were never the same. Jesus didn't wake up one day and say, today I think I'll eat at a sinner's house. No, he said, Zacchaeus, come down. I want to have dinner with you. Because when you put a name and a face to something, it automatically increases its value. This passage is literally saying, people matter. You matter. I matter. It's not about the wall. It's about you. Yes, the wall is important, but it's not as important as its function, which is to connect people to God. And how does this apply to our modern context? Well, if what we do here at church ever becomes more important than the people, now it's about the wall. We've shifted our focus. If we ever become an organization built around programs and metrics and money and smoke machines and graphics and clever videos, if it ever becomes more about that and less about the people that God has brought together, then we should just tear the whole thing down. Because that's not the point. The goal of the wall, the goal of the church has always been and always should be people and connecting those people to God. This list of names, painstakingly detailed, is to emphasize that God's greatest work is never about the fortress. God's greatest work is never about an individual calling. It's always about the impact on and from other people. God's greatest work is people. And let's do a disclaimer here. We have not always gotten this right in the past, and we might not always get it right in the future. Sometimes we get focused on the building. Sometimes we get focused on building the ministry and getting more people and making something excellent. We do have clever sayings about building large communities. Let's have some humility and honesty and say it would be cool to have every seat filled. It would be spectacular to have a lot of money coming in, to have worship records and impact the world on a global level, because we do have a culture that thrives off of bigger and better and followers and metrics and likes and retweets. But if having a big following was the point, then Jesus was a terrible influencer because his magic number was 12. In fact, when Jesus hits 5,000 subscribers, he lost them all with a hard saying in John chapter 6. So either Jesus was bad at building something, or we're focused on the wrong thing. Maybe it's not about the number of people that we have, but about discipling the people we do have. Maybe it's not about getting more. Maybe it's about caring for what we've been given. Because that's not why the wall was built. That's not what the church is for. The church should be a body of people following after Jesus and loving each other as best we can together, supporting each other's aim, which is to connect to God. It's about people. That is the great work of God. And as we wrap this up, how do we do this? How do we at LHC handle the big picture, the grand vision? Well, I'll sum it up like this. It's a simple prayer. God, give my heart the shift. It's really easy to become internally focused, to not operate in love, and to be a little bit callous as the world around us changes. And I get it. People believe different things. They've got different political affiliations. They've got different identities. They even have some strange theology at times. And while it's understandable, church, it's not acceptable. Because that's not the high calling of Jesus. The high calling of Jesus is to love radically. It's a misunderstood love. It's ununderstandable. It's not acceptable. It doesn't make sense to the world around us. It confounds them. Because it's not self-seeking. It's sacrificial. So God, give my heart the shift to love those around me. Give my heart the shift. God, I've tried to live my Christian journey alone. I need other people speaking into my life, supporting the work that you've called me to, whether that's physical with something like delegation, maybe that's emotional with matters of the heart, or even spiritual support, thinking that I've got it all together when I really need to grow. God, give my heart the shift. God, I've looked at this building and the operations within it with more importance and value than the people you've called here. Change my heart to see people the way that you do, to value them the way that you do, to love them the way that you do. Why do we do this? Why do we have this building with almost 100 years of history tied to it? Why are there ministries and prayer meetings? Why is there Zoom Bible studies and a preschool and a gym? Well, it's about people and connecting those people to God. Anything less than that isn't the vision of God. One of the core values of the CMA is that lost people matter to God. He wants them found. And I agree with that 100%. And I would take it a step further and simplify it to say, people matter to God, period. And if it matters to God, it's got to matter to us. And as we step into our calling, the great work of God as Christians, as Long Hill Chapel, as the CMA in New Jersey, it's very easy to lose our focus, to not see the great work of God. Sometimes the path doesn't look very yellow brick road. But I think the easiest way to realign when we become discouraged, when we become afraid, and when we're focused on the wrong thing is to ask God to give our hearts the shift, to align our eyes with God's heart, which always has been and always will be you, me, people. Nehemiah isn't about a wall, and Christianity isn't about a building. Both are focused on the very thing that Christ gave his life for, which is connecting people to God's heart. Let's close in prayer. God, give my heart the shift. Where I've focused on a fortress, let me refocus on the family. Where I've focused on myself, let me recognize other people you've placed around me. Because your heart and mind should be aligned, aimed at connecting all people to you. Let this be our greatest ambition in life, both individually and together, for your name's sake. Amen. Thanks for being with us this morning. Have a great day.
You know what I need. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. The kingdom of the heavens is now advancing. Invade my heart, invade this broken town. The kingdom of the heavens is buried treasure. Would you sell yourself to buy the one you found? Two things you told me, that you are strong.